He walked into class like any other student, quiet, prepared, and ready to learn. But what happened next wasn't about equations or formulas. It was about power, prejudice, and a professor who thought she could humiliate him in front of everyone. She didn't see his brilliance. She only saw the color of his skin. And when she tried to break him, she had no idea she was about to expose herself instead. This isn't just a story about math. It's about what happens when arrogance collides with undeniable truth. But how does a student turn humiliation into victory? You're about to find out. Daniel Reed wasn't the kind of student anyone noticed at first glance. He kept his head down, sat near the middle of the lecture hall, and dressed in the same simple hoodies and jeans most days. To his classmates, he was quiet, maybe even forgettable. But numbers had always been his world. While others wrestled with pages of equations, Daniel moved through them like water, patterns unfolding naturally in his mind. On the surface, it looked like just another semester in Professor Cartwright's notoriously difficult calculus class. Students whispered about her sharp tone, her strict rules, and the way she seemed to thrive on making people squirm. Still, Daniel wasn't worried. He had faced tough classes before. What he didn't expect was that this course wouldn't test just his math skills. It would test his dignity. Because for Cartwright, it wasn't enough to demand excellence. She needed to prove control. And when her gaze landed on Daniel, she didn't just see a student. She saw someone she thought she could put in his place. What neither of them realized was that this ordinary Tuesday would shift the balance of power in a way no one in that lecture hall would ever forget. But when the moment came, would Daniel stay silent or rise to a challenge meant to break him? He thought moving to this neighborhood meant peace, a fresh start for him and his family. But peace has a way of cracking under the weight of suspicion. The first cracks came small. The long stares at the grocery store, the whispered conversations that stopped when he walked past. He told himself he was imagining it, that people just needed time. But then came the notes, folded pieces of paper left on his windshield, scrawled in thick black ink. Go back where you came from. He tried to shrug it off, but the next time, it wasn't paper. It was spray paint, dripping red across his garage door. Not welcome. He scrubbed until his hands burned, until the chemical sting clung to his lungs, and the whole time he could feel eyes watching from behind drawn curtains. No one spoke up. No one helped. Still, he kept quiet. He had a son to think about. He couldn't risk stirring more hate, but hatred doesn't wait for permission. It was a Friday night when it happened. He was driving home from work, headlights cutting through the dark, when he saw the flashing red and blue in his rear view. His chest tightened. He hadn't been speeding. He hadn't broken a single law. Still, he pulled over, hands trembling on the wheel. The officer walked up slow, tapping the flashlight against his palm. Step out of the car. No explanation, no reason, just authority, heavy and unyielding. He stepped out, voice steady as he asked, "Is there a problem, officer?" The response was a shove against the hood, cold metal biting his cheek, a knee pressed into his back. His breath caught as the cuffs snapped around his wrists. His son's voice echoed in his head. "Daddy, are you coming home for movie night?" Neighbors emerged from their houses, phones glowing as they recorded. Some laughed, some shook their heads, none intervened. And then came the words, sharp and deliberate, "You fit the description." The description, always the description, as if his skin was the crime. They searched his car, tearing through seats, pulling open compartments. Nothing, because there was nothing. He tried to speak, to defend himself, but his words were drowned out by the crackle of the radio, the officer's voice calling for backup. His knees buckled as the weight of another injustice pressed down on him. This wasn't the first time, and in the pit of his stomach, he feared it wouldn't be the last. He could hear his pulse in his ears, loud and frantic. What if this time he didn't make it home? What if the cuffs were the last thing his son ever saw on him? The crowd grew thicker, their whispers colder. One woman leaned in close enough for him to hear. Serves him right. His body stiffened. Anger burned through his veins, but he swallowed it down. Because anger could be fatal. Then, just when he thought the night couldn't turn darker, another set of headlights swung into the street. A familiar car. A familiar voice shouting his name. His son's voice. His son stepping out, walking closer. Not as a boy, but as a man in uniform. The officer holding him froze. Confusion flickered across his face. And in that instant, the entire street went silent, waiting for the collision of two truths. The father on the ground, cuffed and humiliated, and the son in a badge, ready to decide what happened next. But whose authority would win? The father's innocence or the system's prejudice? The answer was about to ignite a fire no one on that street would ever forget. And that's when everything broke wide open. The street was silent, except for the rasp of his own breath against the hood of the car. The cuffs bit deeper into his wrists as the officer pressed down harder, as if trying to grind him into the pavement. And then, his son's voice cut through the tension. Firm, commanding. "Get your hands off my father." The crowd gasped. Every phone tilted, recording. The officer froze, flashlight trembling in his grip. His son stepped closer, the badge glinting under the streetlights, his uniform crisp, his jaw set. Authority met authority, but authority doesn't erase prejudice. The officer sneered. "This your father?" He fits the description. "I'm doing my job." "Your job?" His son shot back, voice rising. "Your job is to protect and serve, not humiliate and terrorize. He's innocent. Release him. Now." The two men locked eyes, one clinging to power, the other demanding justice. The crowd leaned forward, hungry to see which truth would win. And in that unbearable pause, he, still pinned to the hood, felt the weight of generations pressing down on him. The same struggle his grandfather faced, walking home at night. The same fear his father carried, pulled over for driving while black. And now, his own son standing in the crossfire of history and hate. The officer's hand twitched toward his holster. The air snapped tight, so tense it could shatter. His heart slammed against his ribs. His son's hand went to his own holster, not to draw, but to warn. "I will not let you do this. One wrong move and this quiet street would become a battlefield." He squeezed his eyes shut, praying. For his life, for his son's restraint, for a miracle that wouldn't end in another name added to the long list of hashtags. Then, the sharpest sound, metal clicking open. The cuffs. The officer yanked them off with a curse, shoving him away like trash. "You're lucky," he muttered, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Lucky. He staggered to his feet, wrists burning, dignity shredded. His son stood beside him, a wall of resolve, a badge glinting like a shield. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some jeering, all recording. The world had witnessed every second. But he knew the fight wasn't over. This wasn't just one night. This was every night, every street, every shadow where suspicion could turn deadly. And as father and son locked eyes, both shaken but unbroken, one thought cut deeper than the cuffs ever could. What happens the next time? When his son isn't there to stop it. He walked home that night with his son at his side, the adrenaline still pulsing through his veins, his wrists still raw from the cuffs. On the outside, he looked free. But inside, he carried a wound no doctor could treat. It wasn't just the bruises or the humiliation. It was the knowledge that his dignity had been stripped away in front of strangers, and that survival had depended on his son stepping in with a badge of his own. That truth haunted him. Because what about the fathers whose sons weren't officers? What about the men who didn't have a crowd recording or a uniform to force the world to take notice? He knew many of their stories ended in silence, in headlines that came too late, or in lives erased without accountability. The night became a mirror he couldn't turn away from, a mirror reflecting centuries of struggle, from his ancestors in chains to his own father pulled over on empty highways. The faces changed, the uniforms changed, but the pattern remained the same. It was never about guilt or innocence. It was about skin, about suspicion woven so deep into the system that even innocence looked like a threat. And yet, standing there with his son, he also felt something else: defiance. They had survived. The crowd had witnessed. The truth was no longer hidden in the dark. It had been dragged into the light. And maybe, just maybe, that mattered. Because silence is the soil where injustice grows. But stories like his? They're the cracks in the pavement, the places where truth breaks through. He realized this wasn't just about one night or one family. It was about all the nights, all the families, all the lives forced to navigate a world where a walk home could end in tragedy. His story wasn't the exception. It was the rule, and that is what makes it unbearable. So he told it, again and again, not because it was easy to relive, but because silence was no longer an option, because every retelling was a warning, a reminder, a call. And now, it's yours too. The question is, what will you do with it? Will you let it be just another story that fades into the noise? Or will you carry it, share it, and demand that the cycle finally break? Because until the world changes, no walk is ever truly safe.